Hello, welcome back to History of Wine and the Vine. I'm Emily Kate. So this week we're going to continue with our Have a Drink With series, and we're going to go back to ancient Egypt. So we're going to have a drink with Tutankhamun. So if you were having a drink with Tutankhamun, obviously you were very privileged. But actually, if you were having wine in general in ancient Egypt, you were already very privileged. Because wine in ancient Egypt wasn't really the drink of choice, it was actually beer. And so wine was used for very special occasions. Obviously the royal family was able to drink it, but other than that, nobility was, but it was used as kind of a prize for military people. So if you were able to have some kind of military victory, you were allotted some wine. It was also used for offerings. So it was mainly kind of religious in use, which added to its prestige because you would offer it to the gods. So it was definitely very much a special drink, shall we say, especially grape wine, because they also had date wine and, like I mentioned, beer, which was kind of for everybody. So if you were having kind of a drink with Tutankhamun, it would likely be at a banquet. So a banquet would have been kind of a big, large celebration with food, a big, huge table. We actually have some great images of banquets, and it's just kind of everybody lined up at a table. There's a lot of food, there's a lot of drink. And this is really essentially how it was consumed, because other than that, it was really mainly just an offering. So it was consumed at a banquet. You would have gone. There would have been music, and at times there are also a lot of images of people that are drinking wine in ancient Egypt through a siphon. So whereas normally we mostly just see people drinking out of cups, there's a lot of popular imagery where people are drinking kind of out of something that looks like a straw. So you would have like an enormous bowl, and then essentially just like a straw or a reed, and you would just be taking off the top. And the reason why they kind of preferred to do that was that there was so much sediment in the wine at that time. And when not everybody is drinking a certain beverage in a society, you don't really perfect it. So even though it was this prestige drink, it was so expensive because so few people were having it. They didn't really have all of the products kind of sorted out that they needed to have with it. But one thing they did like was getting drunk, because quite obviously, if it's very expensive to have wine, it becomes a sort of kind of status symbol to get drunk. And there's a lot of paintings of people, like tomb paintings of people and reliefs of people that are vomiting because, you had to have a lot of money to drink enough to vomit. So, unpleasant, but at the same time, understandable of how that could kind of happen. And I have a quote here from one of my favorite books. I know you guys are probably bored of me mentioning it, but The Origins and Ancient History of Wine, edited by Patrick McGovern, Stuart Fleming, and Solomon H. Katz. So I'm going to read you just this one. This is from somebody in 1500 BC, and it's written in their tomb. She says, "Give me 18 measures of wine. Behold, I should love to drink to drunkenness. My inside is as dry as straw." And the servant who she's speaking to says, "Drink, do not refuse. Behold, I am not going to leave you. Drink, do not spoil the entertainment, and let the cup come to me." So there's just so much emphasis on being drunk. But then interestingly enough, whereas you would have, if you were having a drink with Tutankhamun, you would have had many drinks with Tutankhamun. But then at the same time, you weren't really supposed to shout it in the streets, so to speak. So it was perfectly fine to get really drunk, and to the point where you would expel the excess. But there was a line drawn that once you did that, you and Tutankhamun would have to kind of stay at home, stay in the palace. One of the reasons why we know so much about, especially about Tutankhamun, is because when ancient Egyptians died and they kind of buried in their tombs, they had either actual wine or wine offering lists. So we know so much about the wine of ancient Egypt because it's all been wonderfully preserved in these tombs. So there's not just the actual wine, but the things that were written on the wine give us such an amazing idea of kind of the style and everything. So I have here an image, and I'll just show you really fast. This is just my computer. And this is actually an ancient Egyptian wine label. And I'm gonna tell you what it said, because I don't know how many of you read hieratic script. It says, year 4, I'll explain that. Sweet wine of the house of Aten, life, prosperity, health of the Western River, chief vintner, a Pero shop. So this baffled me when I first saw it. So if you were kind of having a drink with Tutankhamun, you would know exactly what kind of drink you were having because everything on it. So year 4, not the 4th year of the world or anything, but it's the 4th year, it's the regnal year. So it's the 4th year that Tutankhamun was kind of in office, so to speak. So you would always have that. Then you would have the winemaker who made it, the domain it was from, the style. You would just have so much information. And of course, when you have information like this, certain places kind of rise above the others, which means that if you were having kind of a drink with Tutankhamun, he would probably be trying to impress you or show off, and you would have one of these really, really lovely vintages. Now, how do we know which vintages were really the best in Tutankhamun's time? Well, if you were to travel back in time, you should ask for a vintage from the 4th, 5th, or 9th year of his reign, because those were his favorites. And we know that because out of 20-something jars, 26 jars, I think, in his tomb, in the annex of his tomb, 23 were from those years. So these were clearly really fantastic years for wine. And just knowing that shows you that kind of if you could have vintage wine, it meant that you also had kind of the elements to age it. So you would have had a very kind of fresh tasting wine. You could have different styles. So you could have just a huge breadth of different types of wine if you were to go back and have wine with him. Much of the wine that you would have been drinking if you went back in time and had a drink with Tutankhamun would have been imported. And it really would have been imported from Syria because that was kind of known as the prime wine space of the time. And a very important thing to remember is that you would have been toasting apparently all the time, because there are so many different toasts that we hear of, and they all kind of, you know how we say cheers, or some people say salud, or things like that. They would always say for your ka, and your ka is like your spirit. So for your spirit, and then they would say something else. So for your ka, blah, blah, blah. And then you would have drank. And also not just speeches, but they actually sang lots of songs about being drunk, and they called it being merry or making merry. So lots of different kind of rituals to go through with your drink with Tutankhamun. So I hope that this kind of clarified what it might be like to have a drink with Tutankhamun. And give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe because we'll have another one of these next week, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!